The dust from the stagecoach still hung in the air when Sarah Lancaster stepped onto the wooden boardwalk of Redemption, Texas, her worn carpetbag clutched in gloved hands that trembled despite her best efforts to steady them. It was the spring of 1877, and she had come to this sun-baked cattle town with nothing but $23 sewn into her petticoat, and a desperate hope that her past would not follow her across 3 state lines. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Main Street, where cattle lowed in distant pens and the smell of horses mixed with the sweet scent of honeysuckle that climbed the posts outside the general store. Sarah's dark hair was pinned beneath a modest bonnet, and her calico dress, though faded from countless washings, was clean and properly buttoned to her throat. She had learned long ago that respectability was something you wore on the outside when the inside felt too damaged to show the world. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Calloway, a stern-faced woman with silver hair and surprisingly kind eyes who asked no questions when Sarah paid for 2 weeks in advance. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the livery stable across the street. That first night, Sarah lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this new town, the occasional shout from the saloon 3 blocks down, the jingle of spurs on the boardwalk, the lonesome whistle of a night train passing through. She pressed her hands against her flat stomach and whispered a prayer that here finally she might find peace. She found work the next morning at the Redemption Hotel, washing linens and serving breakfast to guests. The proprietor, Mr. Henderson, was a portly man with a bushy mustache who seemed grateful to have help after his previous girl had run off with a traveling salesman. Sarah worked with quiet efficiency, keeping her eyes down and her conversations brief. She had learned in the hardest possible way that the less people knew about you, the safer you were. It was on her 3rd day in Redemption that she first saw him. She was carrying a basket of clean sheets across the street when a horse whinnied and reared, startled by a dog that had darted into the road. Sarah stumbled backward, dropping her basket, and would have fallen into the mud if strong hands had not caught her shoulders and steadied her. She looked up into a face that made her breath catch, not because it was classically handsome, though there was a rugged appeal to his sun-bronzed features, but because of the kindness in his gray-blue eyes. "You all right, miss?" His voice was low and warm, with the slight drawl of someone who had spent his life under open skies. Sarah stepped back quickly, smoothing her skirts. "I am fine, thank you, sir." He bent to retrieve her scattered sheets, dusting them off before placing them carefully back in her basket. He was tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate simply, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw. He wore typical cowboy attire, worn denim pants, a blue cotton shirt, a leather vest, and a gun belt that sat easy on his hips. But it was his eyes that held her, honest and direct without being forward. "Name is Jack Dalton," he said, handing her the basket. "I work the Triple Bar Ranch, about 10 miles north of town." "Sarah Lancaster?" She took the basket, acutely aware of the weight of his gaze. "I am new here." "I figured as much. I know most folks in Redemption." He smiled then, a slow curve of his mouth that made something flutter in her chest that she had thought long dead. "Welcome to town, Miss Lancaster. I hope you find what you're looking for here." She watched him walk away, his gait easy and unhurried, and felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her. It frightened her more than she cared to admit. Over the following weeks, Sarah fell into a rhythm in Redemption. She worked 6 days a week at the hotel, attended church services on Sunday, and saved every penny she could spare. She made few friends, though Mrs. Calloway seemed to have taken a protective interest in her, often leaving extra biscuits on her plate at supper. The other women in town were polite but distant, perhaps sensing that Sarah held herself apart deliberately. Jack Dalton, however, seemed to appear everywhere. She would see him at the general store buying supplies for the ranch. He would tip his hat and ask how she was settling in. He came to town every Saturday night, not to drink at the saloon, but to play cards at the hotel dining room, a friendly game with some of the local ranchers and businessmen. Sarah would serve coffee and sandwiches, and Jack would always thank her with that warm smile that made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced in years. One Saturday evening in late May, after the card game had broken up and the other men had left, Jack lingered at his table. Sarah was wiping down the counter when he approached, hat in hand. "Miss Lancaster, I was wondering if you might allow me to walk you to church tomorrow morning?" Sarah's hand stilled on the cloth. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Mr. Dalton, I do not think that would be appropriate." "Why not?" His voice was gentle, genuinely curious rather than challenging. "I am a respectable man, and you are an unattached lady. Folks around here would think nothing of it." That was exactly what Sarah feared. If people started noticing her, started asking questions, started digging into where she had come from and why, everything would unravel. But when she looked into Jack's hopeful face, she found herself wanting desperately to be the kind of woman who could simply say yes. "I prefer to walk alone," she said softly, "but I thank you for the offer." She saw the disappointment in his eyes, but he nodded respectfully. "Another time, perhaps." After he left, Sarah sat in her small room and cried for the first time since arriving in Redemption. She cried for the life she had lost, for the innocence stolen from her, and for the possibility of happiness that seemed forever out of reach. But Jack Dalton was persistent in the gentlest possible way. He did not press her to walk out with him again, but he made his interest clear through small kindnesses. He brought her wildflowers once, claiming he had picked them on his ride into town and thought she might like them. Another time, when a drunk cowhand got rowdy in the hotel dining room, Jack was there immediately, quietly but firmly escorting the man outside before any real trouble could start. He never asked for thanks or recognition, never made Sarah feel obligated or uncomfortable. Slowly, despite her best intentions, Sarah felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. She found herself looking forward to Saturdays, to the sound of Jack's voice asking about her week. She started to notice little things about him. The way he was unfailingly kind to everyone, even the Chinese laundry workers that many in town looked down on. How he always had a peppermint stick for the Henderson children when he came to the hotel. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. In early June, Mrs. Calloway invited Sarah to Sunday dinner after church. To Sarah's surprise and secret delight, Jack was there too, along with the banker and his wife, the school teacher, and the local doctor. It was a lively meal, full of conversation and laughter. Jack sat across from Sarah, and several times their eyes met over the platters of fried chicken and mashed potatoes. Each time, Sarah felt that strange flutter in her chest, that dangerous warmth spreading through her. After dinner, as the group gathered on Mrs. Calloway's porch to enjoy the evening breeze, Jack appeared at Sarah's elbow with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Walk with me?" he asked quietly. This time, Sarah found herself nodding. They strolled down the dusty street in the golden light of evening, sipping their lemonade and talking about simple things. Jack told her about his work on the ranch, about the new foals born that spring, about his plans to eventually own his own spread. Sarah found herself sharing more than she intended, talking about how she loved the wide Texas sky, so different from Missouri where she had grown up, and how the smell of honeysuckle always made her think of her mother. "You never mention your family?" Jack said carefully. "Are they still in Missouri?" Sarah's step faltered. "My parents are dead. I have no other family." "I am sorry." His voice was sincere. "That must be hard, being alone in the world." "Sometimes," Sarah admitted, "but there is a freedom in it too, a chance to become whoever you want to be." Jack stopped walking and turned to face her. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the intensity in his eyes. "And who do you want to be, Sarah Lancaster?" The use of her first name, without the formal Miss, sent a shiver down her spine. "I want to be someone good," she whispered, "someone worthy of respect." "You already are." He said it with such conviction that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I have been watching you these past months. You work hard. You are kind to everyone, and you carry yourself with dignity. Whatever you think you need to prove, I want you to know that I already see your worth." Sarah could not speak past the lump in her throat. No one had spoken to her like this in so long, had seen her as anything other than what she had been forced to become. She wanted to throw herself into Jack's arms, to bury her face in his chest and sob out all the pain and shame she carried. But she also knew that if she let herself care for this good man, she would eventually have to tell him the truth. And when she did, she would lose him. "We should head back," she managed to say. "It will be dark soon." Over the following weeks, Sarah tried to maintain her distance, but Jack was having none of it. He began riding into town more often, always with some excuse. He needed supplies. He had to speak with the bank about a loan. He was picking up mail. And somehow he always managed to find Sarah, to share a few words, a smile, a moment of connection that left her feeling more alive than she had in years. By July, they were officially courting, though Sarah had never quite agreed to it in so many words. It had simply happened, like summer heat settling over the prairie, natural and inevitable. Jack would take her on buggy rides out to see the ranch. They would have picnics by the creek that ran through the Triple Bar property, sitting in the shade of cottonwood trees while Jack pointed out hawks circling overhead and told her stories of his childhood in West Texas. He had grown up the son of a rancher, had learned to ride before he could properly walk, and had come to Redemption 5 years ago to work for Mr. Barrett, the owner of the Triple Bar. "I have been saving my wages," Jack told her one afternoon as they sat by the creek, their feet dangling in the cool water. "In another year or two, I will have enough to make an offer on the Crawford place. It is not much, maybe 100 acres, but it is good grazing land with a decent water source. I could build it into something fine." Sarah listened to the dreams in his voice and felt her heart breaking and soaring simultaneously. "You would make a wonderful rancher, Jack. You have the knowledge and the dedication." He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "I do not want to do it alone, Sarah. I want a partner, a wife, someone to build a life with." Her breath caught. "Jack, I know it is fast," he continued, taking her hand in his calloused one. "I know you might need more time, but I have to tell you what is in my heart. From the moment I caught you on the street that day, I have been falling in love with you. The way you move through the world with such quiet strength. The kindness in your eyes, even though I can see you have been hurt. The way you make me want to be a better man. I love you, Sarah, and I want to marry you." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "You do not know what you are saying. You do not know who I really am." "Then tell me." His grip on her hand tightened. "Tell me everything and let me decide for myself." So there, by the creek, with the sun filtering through the cottonwood leaves and the sound of water burbling over rocks, Sarah told him. She told him about growing up poor in Missouri, about her father dying when she was 15 and her mother a year later. She told him about having no money, no family, no prospects. She told him about the man who had promised to help her, to give her work as a seamstress, and how that promise had been a lie. She told him about the brothel in St. Louis, where she had been held for 2 years, about the things she had been forced to do, the degradation and shame that had become her daily existence. She told him about finally escaping, about fleeing west with nothing but the clothes on her back and a determination to start over. By the time she finished, she was sobbing, unable to look at him. "So you see," she choked out, "I am not the woman you think I am. I am ruined, damaged. No decent man would want me as a wife." For a long moment, Jack said nothing. Sarah waited for him to drop her hand, to stand up and walk away, to look at her with the disgust she had seen in so many eyes before. Instead, he gently cupped her face and turned it toward him. "Look at me, Sarah." She forced her eyes to meet his, expecting condemnation. What she saw instead was compassion, anger on her behalf, and an unwavering tenderness that made her cry harder. "What was done to you," Jack said fiercely, "was not your fault. You were forced, exploited, trapped. There's no shame in that. The shame belongs to the men who hurt you, not to you." He wiped her tears away with his thumbs. You are the bravest woman I have ever met. You survived something terrible, and you fought your way to freedom. You came here and built a new life with nothing but your own strength and determination. How can you think that makes you anything less than extraordinary? But I am not pure, Sarah whispered. I am not innocent. Neither am I. Jack's voice was gentle but firm. I have made mistakes, done things I regret. None of us come to adulthood without scars, Sarah. What matters is who we choose to be going forward. He leaned his forehead against hers. I love you. Not some imaginary perfect version of you, but the real you, with all your strength and all your wounds. And if you will have me, I still want to marry you. Sarah could not believe what she was hearing. It seemed impossible that this good, decent man could know her darkest secrets and still want her. You truly mean it, with everything I am. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss full of promise and hope. Sarah kissed him back, letting herself believe for the first time in years that perhaps she deserved happiness after all. They spent the rest of that afternoon making plans. Jack wanted to get married as soon as possible, to start their life together. They would live in the bunkhouse at the Triple Bar until they could afford the down payment on the Crawford place. Sarah would continue working at the hotel until the wedding, saving every penny toward their future. We should speak to Reverend Hutchins, Jack said as they drove back to town in his buggy. Sarah's hand clasped in his. I'm sure he can perform the ceremony in a few weeks, after the banns are read. Sarah nodded, allowing herself to imagine walking down the aisle of the little white church, becoming Mrs. Jack Dalton, starting fresh with a man who loved her despite everything. It seemed too good to be true, and a small, fearful part of her waited for something to go wrong. The next Sunday, Jack and Sarah approached Reverend Hutchins after the service. He was a tall, thin man in his 50s, with gray hair and a long face that rarely smiled. He had come to Redemption 2 years earlier from somewhere back east, and had a reputation for fire and brimstone sermons about sin and damnation. Reverend Hutchins, Jack said respectfully, we would like to speak with you about performing a marriage ceremony. The Reverend's expression was unreadable. Come to my office. They followed him into the small room behind the sanctuary, sitting in hard wooden chairs while the Reverend took his seat behind a battered desk. So you wish to marry? He said, looking from Jack to Sarah. How long have you been courting? About 2 months, sir, Jack replied. But I have known from the beginning that Sarah is the woman I want to spend my life with. And you, Miss Lancaster? The Reverend's gaze fixed on Sarah, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see straight through to her soul. You wish to marry Mr. Dalton? I do, Reverend. Sarah kept her voice steady despite her nerves. I see. Reverend Hutchins steepled his fingers. Before I agree to perform any marriage ceremony, I make it my business to know something of the parties involved. Mr. Dalton, you have been a member of this congregation for several years. You have a good reputation as a hard-working, honest man, but you, Miss Lancaster, are relatively new to our community. Tell me about yourself. Where do you come from? What is your history? Sarah's mouth went dry. She glanced at Jack, who gave her an encouraging nod. I come from Missouri, Reverend. My parents are deceased, and I came to Texas to start a new life. How did your parents die? My father died in an accident, my mother of illness. And what have you been doing since their deaths? A young woman alone in the world can find herself in difficult circumstances. There was something in his tone that made Sarah's stomach clench. I worked where I could, Reverend. I did what I had to do to survive. Did you? Reverend Hutchins leaned forward. I make it my business to know who comes to my town, Miss Lancaster. I have corresponded with several ministers throughout the region, sharing information about our congregations, about people who come and go, and I received a very interesting letter last week from a colleague in St. Louis. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, Jack tensed. This colleague mentioned a young woman matching your description who had been associated with a brothel in his city. A woman who disappeared from that establishment some months ago. The Reverend's voice was cold now, sharp with judgment. Is this true, Miss Lancaster? Were you a prostitute? The word hung in the air like a slap. Sarah could not speak, could barely breathe. She had known this might happen, but she had allowed herself to hope, to believe that perhaps her past could remain buried. "Answer me," the Reverend demanded. "Were you employed in a house of sin?" "She was held against her will," Jack said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "She was forced into that life, and she escaped. She is a victim, not a sinner." "There is no such distinction in the eyes of God." Reverend Hutchins stood, his face hard as stone. "The Bible is clear about sexual immorality. This woman has defiled herself. She is unclean, unsuitable to be a wife to a decent Christian man. I will not perform a ceremony that would bless such a union." "You self-righteous son of a—" Jack started to rise, but Sarah grabbed his arm. "Jack, please." Her voice was barely a whisper. She turned to the Reverend, forcing herself to meet his contemptuous gaze. "I understand, Reverend Hutchins. I will not trouble you further." She stood and walked out of the office, out of the church, into the bright summer sunshine that seemed too cheerful for the devastation in her heart. She heard Jack's voice raised in anger behind her, heard the Reverend's cold responses, but she did not wait. She walked blindly down the street, not caring where she went, only knowing she needed to escape. She found herself at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. She sank down on a sun-warmed rock and finally let herself break apart. All her fears had come true. She had been a fool to think she could have a normal life, a respectable marriage. She was marked forever by what had been done to her, judged not by her own choices, but by the circumstances that had trapped her. She did not know how long she sat there, but eventually she heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Jack appeared, his face flushed with anger and something else, something fierce and determined. "Sarah." He knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "That man is a hypocrite and a fool. He calls himself a servant of God, but he has no compassion, no understanding of mercy or grace." "He is right, though." Sarah's voice was hollow. "I am not fit to be your wife. You should find someone pure, someone who will not bring shame on you." "Stop it." Jack's voice was sharp. "Stop letting other people define your worth. I do not care what that sanctimonious preacher thinks. I do not care what anyone in this town thinks. I love you and I want to marry you. If Hutchins will not perform the ceremony, then we will find another way." "What other way?" Sarah asked bitterly. "We need a minister or a justice of the peace to make it legal. And if word spreads about my past, no one will agree to marry us." Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his face cleared, and he smiled. That warm, determined smile that Sarah had come to love. "Then we will make our own vows. We do not need anyone's permission or blessing to commit our lives to each other. We can speak our promises before God and each other, and that will be enough." "But it would not be legal," Sarah protested. "I would not truly be your wife." "You would be my wife in every way that matters." Jack cupped her face in his hands. "And later, when we have saved enough money, we can travel to another town, somewhere no one knows us, and have a legal ceremony if you want. But I will not let that closed-minded preacher keep us apart, not for another day." Sarah searched his face, seeing only love and determination. "You are sure? You would do this even though people would judge you for it?" "Let them judge." Jack stood and pulled her to her feet. "Come on, I know the perfect place." He led her to where his horse was tied, helped her mount, and then swung up behind her. They rode north out of town, toward the Triple Bar. But before they reached the ranch, Jack turned off onto a narrower trail. They climbed into the hills, following a path that wound between stands of mesquite and cedar. Finally, they emerged into a small valley, green and sheltered, with a spring bubbling up from the rocks to form a clear pool. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in yellows, purples, and reds. A pair of doves called from the trees. "This is the most beautiful place I know," Jack said softly, helping Sarah dismount. "I used to come here when I first arrived in Texas, when I felt lonely or discouraged. Something about this spot always made me feel like God was close, like anything was possible. Sarah looked around at the peaceful valley, the flowers swaying in the gentle breeze, the sunlight sparkling on the water. "It is perfect," she whispered. Jack took both her hands and led her to the edge of the spring. He stood facing her, the afternoon sun casting him in golden light, and Sarah thought she had never seen anything more handsome or more beloved. "Sarah Lancaster," Jack began, his voice clear and strong, "I stand before God and nature as my witnesses and vow to you my love and faithfulness for all the days of my life. I promise to honor you, to respect you, to cherish you for exactly who you are. I promise to stand beside you in times of joy and times of sorrow, to support your dreams and share your burdens. I promise to see you always not for what the world says you should be, but for who you truly are, brave, beautiful, and worthy of every good thing. I give you my heart, my home, and my name from this day forward until death parts us." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she listened to his words, words she had never thought to hear. When he finished, she took a shaky breath and began her own vows. "Jack Dalton, I stand before God and nature as my witnesses and vow to you my love and faithfulness for all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in building our future, to work beside you with all my strength. I promise to honor your kindness, your integrity, and your generous heart. I promise to love you not just for accepting my past, but for seeing my future, for believing in possibilities I thought were lost forever. You have given me hope when I had none, and a reason to believe in goodness again. I give you my heart, my loyalty, and my devotion from this day forward until death parts us." Jack smiled, his own eyes bright with moisture, and pulled a small object from his pocket. It was a simple gold band, plain and unadorned. "I bought this 2 weeks ago," he said. "I've been carrying it with me, waiting for the right moment." He slipped it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. "I have nothing to give you," Sarah said, distressed. "You have given me yourself," Jack replied. "That is everything." He kissed her then, a kiss different from any they had shared before. This was a claiming, a promise, a beginning. Sarah wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into that moment. Gratitude, love, hope, and a fierce determination to make this work, to build a life worthy of the faith he had placed in her. When they finally pulled apart, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "Hello, Mrs. Dalton," he murmured. Sarah laughed, the sound startling her with its pure joy. "Hello, Mr. Dalton." They stayed in the valley until sunset, talking and dreaming about their future. Jack told her more about the Crawford place, describing in detail the house he would build, the corrals and barn, the vegetable garden Sarah could plant. Sarah told him about her hope to someday learn to read better, maybe even to help teach children at the schoolhouse. They talked about children of their own, agreeing they wanted at least 3 or 4, a house full of noise and laughter. As the light faded and stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they rode back to town. Jack left Sarah at the boarding house with a lingering kiss and a promise to return first thing in the morning. Mrs. Calloway was waiting in the parlor when Sarah entered, her face concerned. "I heard what happened at the church," she said quietly. "Half the town has heard by now. Reverend Hutchins has not been shy about sharing his opinions." Sarah's heart sank. She had hoped for a little more time before facing the consequences. "I'm sure you want me to find other lodging where," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I will pack tonight and be gone tomorrow." "You will do no such thing?" Mrs. Calloway stood and crossed to Sarah, surprising her by taking her hands. "I have lived long enough to know that good and bad are not as simple as people like to think. I have seen supposedly respectable folks do terrible things, and I have seen people that society looks down on show tremendous courage and kindness. You are a good person, Sarah. Whatever happened to you before you came here does not change that." Sarah felt fresh tears threaten. "Thank you," she whispered. "Besides," Mrs. Calloway continued with a slight smile, "Jack Dalton is one of the finest young men I've ever known. If he has chosen you, that tells me everything I need to know about your character." Over the next few days, Sarah learned that Mrs. Calloway was not the only person in Redemption willing to look past her history. Mr. Henderson called her into his office at the hotel and told her that her employment was secure for as long as she wanted it. The doctor and his wife stopped by to invite her to dinner. Even Mr. Barrett, Jack's employer at the Triple Bar, made a point of speaking to her when he came to town, telling her he looked forward to having her at the ranch. But there were others who were not so kind. Some of the church-going ladies crossed the street to avoid her. Mothers pulled their children away when she passed. Reverend Hutchins preached a sermon about the corruption of sin and the importance of maintaining moral standards in the community, and everyone knew who he was talking about. Sarah tried not to let it hurt, but some nights she lay awake wondering if she had been selfish to let Jack tie himself to her. He deserved better than a wife who brought him gossip and judgment. Jack, however, seemed unconcerned with public opinion. He continued courting Sarah openly, taking her on buggy rides, sitting with her at community gatherings, making it clear to everyone that she was his chosen partner. When someone made a snide comment in his hearing, he would fix them with a cold stare and ask if they had something to say to his face. Most people backed down quickly. Jack was well liked and respected, and no one wanted to lose his goodwill over gossip. In August, Mr. Barrett offered Jack a promotion to foreman with a significant raise in pay. It meant they could afford to make an offer on the Crawford place sooner than expected. Jack was jubilant when he told Sarah the news. "We could be on our own land by this time next year," he said, spinning her around in an impromptu dance in front of the hotel. "We can start building our life, Sarah, really start it." They went to look at the Crawford place the following Sunday. The property was about 15 miles from Redemption, accessed by a rutted wagon road that climbed into rolling hills covered with prairie grass and scattered stands of live oak. The house was small and in poor repair, abandoned for several years since old Mr. Crawford died and his children moved east. But the land was beautiful, with good water from a creek that ran year-round and ample grazing for cattle. "We will have to rebuild the house," Jack said, walking through the sagging structure. "Maybe expand it a bit, add a proper kitchen and a couple more rooms for children." Sarah stood in what had been the main room, trying to imagine it restored and filled with furniture, with warmth and life. "I can see it," she said softly. "I can see us here." Jack came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "We will be happy here," he murmured into her hair. "I promise you that." Sarah covered his hands with hers and leaned into his embrace, letting herself believe it. They made their offer to the Crawford heirs through the bank in September, a modest sum that represented every penny Jack had saved over 5 years of hard work. The process was slow, requiring correspondence with lawyers back east, but finally in late October, word came that the offer had been accepted. The land was theirs, or would be once the final papers were signed and the money transferred. Jack wanted to celebrate properly. He arranged for them to travel to the county seat, a larger town about 40 miles from Redemption, where there was a justice of the peace who could perform a legal marriage ceremony. They would stay overnight at a hotel and return the next day as husband and wife in the eyes of the law. They set out on a crisp November morning, the air finally cooling after the long Texas summer. Sarah wore her best dress, a green calico that Mrs. Calloway had helped her make, and carried a small carpet bag with a nightgown and change of clothes. Jack drove the wagon, whistling a cheerful tune, clearly excited about what lay ahead. The county seat was called Millersville, a bustling town 3 times the size of Redemption, with 2 hotels, multiple saloons, a proper opera house, and paved streets. They found the courthouse easily, a grand brick building in the town square. The justice of the peace was a jovial man named Judge Morrison, who asked no probing questions, simply had them sign a form and repeat brief vows before pronouncing them legally married. He gave them a marriage certificate properly witnessed and stamped with the county seal. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Dalton," Judge Morrison said with a smile. "May you have many happy years together." As they walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sunshine, Jack grabbed Sarah around the waist and kissed her soundly, right there on the steps. Sarah laughed and blushed but did not pull away. Let people look. She was his wife now, in every legal and moral sense. They checked into the Millersville Hotel, requesting a room with a double bed. The clerk gave them a knowing smile and handed over a key. Their room was on the second floor, larger and nicer than Sarah's boarding house room, with a real wardrobe, a comfortable-looking bed covered in a colorful quilt, and curtains on the window. Jack set down their bags and turned to Sarah, suddenly shy. "I know we have been calling ourselves married for months now," he said, "but this feels different somehow, more official." Sarah crossed to him and took his hands. "It is different, and I am glad we waited, that we did this the right way." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "I love you, Jack Dalton. I am proud to be your wife." He kissed her then, a long, slow kiss that quickly deepened into something more urgent. They came together with all the passion of months of restrained courtship, of love that had been tested and proven true. Jack was gentle and patient, mindful of Sarah's past trauma, constantly checking that she was comfortable, that she wanted this. And Sarah, for the first time in her life, experienced physical intimacy as something beautiful and joyful rather than degrading. With Jack, she was not an object to be used, but a cherished partner, loved and respected and desired for herself. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath the quilt, talking quietly as the afternoon faded into evening. Jack told her again about his dreams for the Crawford place, how he wanted to raise beef cattle and maybe some horses. Sarah told him about her hope to make their home beautiful, to fill it with children and laughter and love. They ordered dinner sent up to the room and ate in bed, feeding each other bites of roast chicken and apple pie, giggling like children. The next morning they started the journey back to redemption as a truly married couple. Sarah kept looking at the marriage certificate, touching the gold band on her finger, marveling that this was real, that she truly belonged to Jack and he to her. When they arrived back in town, they went straight to Mr. Henderson at the hotel to give notice. Sarah would work through the end of the month and then move out to the Triple Bar to live with Jack in the foreman's cottage. It was a small house, just 2 rooms, but it was theirs alone. A vast improvement over the bunkhouse Jack had been sharing with the other ranch hands. The foreman's cottage was whitewashed adobe with a red tile roof and a small covered porch. Inside, the main room served as kitchen and living space with a cast iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a couple of comfortable armchairs near the fireplace. The bedroom was barely big enough for the double bed and a dresser, but it had a window that looked out over the prairie, and Sarah immediately loved it. She threw herself into making the little house a home. She sewed curtains for the windows, braided a rag rug for the floor, and planted herbs in pots on the porch. Jack built her shelves for dishes and a proper counter for food preparation. In the evenings, after Jack finished his work and Sarah had prepared supper, they would sit together on the porch and watch the sun set over the endless Texas landscape. Sarah had never known this kind of contentment. For the first time in her life, she felt safe, cherished, and valued. Jack treated her with constant kindness and respect, never raising his voice, never making her feel less than worthy. He encouraged her to pursue her interests, praising her cooking and her sewing, listening with genuine interest when she talked about maybe helping at the school once they moved to their own place. Christmas that year was the happiest Sarah could remember. She and Jack spent the day with Mrs. Calloway and several other families from town, enjoying a feast of roast goose and all the trimmings. Jack gave Sarah a beautiful shawl he had bought on a trip to San Antonio, soft wool in a deep blue color. Sarah gave him a shirt she had sewn herself, carefully embroidered with his initials on the pocket. They attended the Christmas Eve service at church, despite Reverend Hutchins's presence, and Sarah held her head high as she walked in on her husband's arm. The new year of 1878 brought more progress toward their goals. The final papers on the Crawford place were signed in January, and they officially owned 100 acres of Texas land. Jack spent his Sundays at the property, clearing brush and starting to repair the most urgent problems with the house. Sarah went with him when she could, scrubbing floors and walls, tearing out the old newspapers that had been stuffed in cracks for insulation. In February, Sarah realized she was pregnant. The symptoms were unmistakable. The missed monthly courses, the nausea that struck every morning, the tenderness in her breasts. She was terrified and elated in equal measure. She had never allowed herself to imagine being a mother, had assumed that part of her had been broken beyond repair by what she had endured. But now, feeling the changes in her body, she dared to hope that perhaps she could do this, could bring a child into the world and love it the way she had been loved so briefly by her own mother. She told Jack on a Sunday afternoon at their property. They had been working all day, and Jack had suggested they rest by the creek. As they sat in the shade, Sarah took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is something you should know," she said quietly. "We are going to have a baby." Jack's eyes went wide. "Truly? You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, but I have all the signs." "A baby." Jack's voice was full of wonder. Voice was full. Then he whooped with joy and pulled Sarah into his arms, spinning her around. "We are going to be parents, Sarah! This is incredible!" She laughed at his enthusiasm, feeling her fears ease in the face of his pure happiness. "You are pleased? Pleased? I am over the moon." He set her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Are you all right? Should you be working so hard? Maybe you should rest more." "I am fine," Sarah assured him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will not break." But Jack was not to be dissuaded from his new role as protective husband. He insisted Sarah see the doctor in Redemption, who confirmed the pregnancy and estimated the baby would arrive in late September. He forbade her from lifting anything heavy and made sure she ate properly. He began working even harder on the house, determined to have it ready before the baby came. "I want our child born in our home," he told Sarah, "not in the foreman's cottage, but on our own land." Through the spring and summer of 1878, their house slowly took shape. Jack hired a carpenter to help with the major structural repairs, and several of the men from the Triple Bar volunteered their Sundays to assist. Even Mr. Barrett came out a few times, hammering alongside his employees. The house was expanded to 4 rooms, a large main room with kitchen and living space, a bedroom for Jack and Sarah, a smaller bedroom for children, and a separate room that could serve as storage or another bedroom as the family grew. They added a real porch across the front and dug a new well closer to the house. Sarah sewed curtains and cushions, painted walls, and planted a vegetable garden. By August, with her belly swollen round with the coming baby, they were ready to move in. It was not fancy, but it was solid and clean and entirely theirs. Their first night in the new house, they lay in their bed listening to the sounds of the prairie. Coyotes howling, wind rustling through the grass, the creek babbling in the distance. Jack's hand rested on Sarah's belly, feeling the baby kick and roll. "I never thought I could be this happy," Sarah whispered into the darkness. "Some days I'm afraid I will wake up and it will all have been a dream." "It is real," Jack assured her. "We built this together, and nothing can take it away from us." The baby came on a warm afternoon in late September, a long labor that left Sarah exhausted but triumphant. Mrs. Calloway came out to assist, along with the doctor from town. Jack paced outside until the baby's cries finally broke the air, then rushed in to find Sarah holding a squirming, red-faced infant. "A boy," the doctor announced with a smile. "A healthy, strong boy." Jack knelt beside the bed, staring in wonder at his son. "He is perfect," he breathed. "Sarah, you did it. You are amazing." They named him Thomas, after Jack's father, with James for a middle name, after Sarah's. Thomas Dalton was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping reasonably, though he had a healthy set of lungs when he wanted attention. Sarah was terrified at first, convinced she would somehow fail at motherhood. But Jack's steady presence and Mrs. Calloway's frequent visits helped her find her confidence. Watching Jack with their son, Sarah fell in love with him all over again. He was a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring the baby to Sarah for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours rocking Thomas and singing to him in his off-key voice. The rough cowboy melted into tenderness when he held his child. They fell into a rhythm on the ranch. Jack continued working as foreman for the Triple Bar, riding over each morning and returning each evening. Sarah cared for Thomas in the house, tended the garden, and started raising chickens. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way she had never experienced. She was building something lasting, creating a life for her family. In the spring of 1879, Jack made his first cattle purchase, 10 head of good breeding stock. He built corrals and a small barn, working every spare moment to improve the ranch. Sarah helped when she could, with Thomas strapped to her back in a sling she had sewn. By that summer, they had their first calves, and the dream of a real cattle operation was beginning to take shape. Sarah discovered she was pregnant again in June. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Jack was just as protective and excited as before. Thomas was walking by then, a sturdy toddler with his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. He would waddle after Jack around the ranch, trying to help with chores, and Jack would patiently let him assist with tasks like feeding chickens or brushing the horse. Their second child, a daughter, arrived in February of 1880. They named her Clara after Sarah's mother. She was tiny and delicate, with blonde hair like silk and eyes that started blue but gradually turned green. Sarah nursed her while Thomas played nearby, and Jack would come in from work to find his whole family piled on the bed together, and his heart would nearly burst with love. Life on the ranch continued its steady rhythm. By 1881, they had grown their herd to 40 cattle, and Jack was able to quit his position at the Triple Bar to focus full-time on their own operation. Money was tight, but they managed. Sarah sold eggs and vegetables in town, and Jack hired himself out for occasional jobs when extra cash was needed. The people of Redemption had long since accepted Sarah as part of the community. Most had forgotten or chosen to overlook her past, judging her instead on the life she was living now. As a devoted wife, loving mother, and hard-working rancher's wife. Even Reverend Hutchins, though he never apologized, had stopped his pointed sermons. A new family had moved to town, providing fresh gossip to occupy the townspeople. Sarah often thought about that day by the spring when she and Jack had spoken their own vows, refusing to let judgment and condemnation keep them apart. It had been the bravest thing she had ever done, choosing to believe she deserved happiness, to trust in Jack's love, and every day since had proven that choice right. In 1882, they had a third child, another boy they named William. He was a chubby, cheerful baby who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the world with wide, curious eyes. Thomas, now 4, was proud of his role as big brother, helping Sarah with both Clara and the new baby. Their house was full of noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of a growing family. Jack thrived as a rancher. He had a natural skill with cattle and horses, and the ranch slowly but steadily prospered. By 1883, they had nearly 100 head of cattle and 3 good horses. Jack hired a ranch hand to help with the work, a young man named Miguel who was grateful for the opportunity and proved to be a tireless worker. Sarah, now 29, had grown into her role as ranch wife with grace and competence. She managed the household, raised the children, kept a garden that was the envy of neighboring farms, and still found time to occasionally help at the school in Redemption. She taught reading to some of the younger children, finding deep satisfaction in passing on knowledge to the next generation. Sometimes visitors would come to the ranch, friends from town or fellow ranchers, and they would ask how Jack and Sarah had met, how their story had begun. Jack would smile and pull Sarah close and say, "I knew from the moment I met her that she was the one," And I was not going to let anything stand in the way of our happiness. Sarah would lean into her husband's embrace and look around at the life they had built. The sturdy house on land they owned, the healthy cattle grazing the hills, the beautiful children playing in the yard. And she would remember the broken girl who had stepped off a stagecoach in Redemption 7 years earlier, terrified and alone, and she would marvel at the journey that had brought her here. In the fall of 1884, Mrs. Calloway passed away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was well attended, for she had been beloved in the community. Sarah wept openly, for the older woman had been like a mother to her, offering unconditional support when so many others had judged. In her will, Mrs. Calloway left Sarah a small bequest of money and a note that read simply, "I am proud of the woman you have become. Use this to build something beautiful." Sarah and Jack used the inheritance to expand the house further, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. They also donated money to the school to buy new books in Mrs. Calloway's memory. That Christmas, they hosted a gathering at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors to celebrate. The house was filled with the smells of roasting meat and baking pies, the sounds of children playing and adults laughing. Jack stood at the head of the table, his family and friends around him, and said a prayer of thanksgiving for all the blessings they had received. Sarah listened to her husband's words, her heart full to bursting. She looked at Thomas, now a rangy 6-year-old, who was already following his father around learning the cattle business. She looked at Clara, 4 and beautiful, and already showing signs of her mother's determination. She looked at William, 2.5 and full of mischief. And she looked at Jack, the man who had refused to let her past define her future, who had loved her when she could barely love herself. After the guests had left and the children were asleep, Sarah and Jack sat together on their porch, wrapped in a quilt against the winter chill. Stars blazed overhead in the clear Texas sky, brilliant and countless. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked softly. "Marrying me despite everything, the judgment we faced?" Jack pulled her closer. "Never. Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah Dalton. You and our children and this life we have built together." "I love you," Sarah whispered, "more than I can ever express. You saved me, Jack. You gave me a reason to believe in goodness again." "You saved yourself," Jack corrected gently. "I just had the privilege of being there when you did." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, the animals settling in the barn, the wind singing through the grass. Inside the house, their children slept safe and warm. Around them stretched the land they had claimed and tamed through hard work and determination. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance. And Sarah thought about the young woman she had been, stepping off that stagecoach in Redemption with nothing but fear and hope. She thought about the closed door of Reverend Hutchins's rejection and the open door of Jack's love. She thought about making their own vows in a flower-filled valley, claiming each other when the world said they had no right. Life was not always easy. There were hard years ahead, droughts and storms, and the endless challenges of ranching. There would be more children, more joys and sorrows, the bittersweet journey of watching their family grow and change. But through it all, there would be this, the unshakable foundation of love that Jack and Sarah had built together, stone by stone, choice by choice, day by day. In the spring of 1885, Sarah discovered she was expecting their 4th child. She was 31 now, and this pregnancy tired her more than the previous ones, but she was deeply happy. The baby, another girl they named Rose, arrived in December, a perfect Christmas gift for the family. As the years passed, the Dalton Ranch prospered. Jack's skill and Sarah's thrift and hard work paid off in steadily increasing herds and improving land. Thomas grew into a capable young rancher, learning everything his father could teach him. Clara showed an interest in school and talked about becoming a teacher someday. William was the family comedian, always making everyone laugh with his antics. And Rose the baby was sweet and gentle, loved by all her siblings. In 1890, Jack and Sarah celebrated their 12th anniversary, or rather the 12th year since they had spoken their vows by the spring. They returned to that valley, leaving the children with Miguel and his wife, who had become like family to them. The wildflowers were blooming just as they had that fateful day, and the spring still bubbled clear and cold. They stood hand in hand, both older now, marked by the years of hard work and raising children, but their love deeper and stronger than ever. "If I had to do it all again," Jack said, looking into Sarah's eyes, "I would not change a single thing. Every moment, every choice led me here to you, to our life together. That is all I could ever want." Sarah kissed him, tasting salt from her own happy tears. "I was so lost when I came here," she said. "I thought my life was over, that I would never be anything more than what had been done to me. But you showed me I was wrong. You showed me that our past does not have to determine our future, that we can choose who we want to be." They renewed their vows there in the valley, speaking words of continued devotion and commitment. And when they rode back to the ranch that evening, it was with hearts full of gratitude for the life they had built together. The Dalton Ranch continued to grow and thrive. By the mid-1890s, they were one of the most successful operations in the county. Thomas, now a young man, had taken on more responsibility, effectively managing much of the day-to-day operations. Clara had indeed become a teacher, taking a position at the Redemption School. William was talking about studying veterinary medicine, fascinated by animal care. And Rose, the youngest, was showing artistic talent, filling the house with her drawings and paintings. Jack and Sarah, now in their 40s, had the satisfaction of seeing their children grow into capable, kind adults. They had worked hard, sacrificed much, but they had never lost sight of what mattered most: family, love, and the determination to build something lasting. On warm evenings, they would still sit on their porch and watch the sunset, hands clasped together, reflecting on the journey that had brought them from that dusty street in Redemption to this place of peace and prosperity. They would remember the day a self-righteous preacher had refused to marry them, and how they had chosen to make their own vows, claiming their love despite the world's judgment. And Sarah would think about the girl she had been, damaged and afraid, and the woman she had become, strong, loved, the mother of 4 beautiful children, the wife of a good man, a respected member of her community. She had not let her past destroy her future. She had chosen to believe in second chances, in redemption that was real and lasting. As the new century approached, bringing changes and challenges to the old frontier ways, the Dalton family remained strong, rooted in the land they loved and the bonds they had forged. Their story had begun with rejection and defiance, with 2 people refusing to let others define their worth or limit their happiness. And it had become something beautiful, a legacy of love, courage, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves a chance to build the life they dream of, regardless of where they started or what they had endured. Jack and Sarah Dalton had proven that true commitment needed no preacher's blessing, that love spoken from the heart in a wildflower valley was just as sacred as any ceremony in a church. They had made their own vows and kept them faithfully for all their days, building a family and a future that honored both the struggles they had overcome and the dreams they had dared to pursue. And in the end, that was the greatest triumph of all. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just enduring, but truly living. Not just accepting love, but returning it in full measure, creating something beautiful and lasting from the broken pieces of a painful past.